Have you ever been reading about history and come across something that just makes you want to know more? Like there's this whole hidden story just waiting to be uncovered.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Those little historical footnotes that make you realize there's so much more to the story than what's on the surface.
Well, that's exactly what we're doing today.
Mhm.
We're diving deep into the relationship between the Benin Kingdom and European powers.
It's a long and complex story full of twists and turns, and we're going to untangle it all for you.
Exactly. We're not just skimming the surface here. We're going deep into some serious academic research.
We want to get to the heart of how these encounters shaped the Benin Kingdom.
So let's start with the basics. Where are we going geographically and when are we starting?
We're talking about the Benin Kingdom in what is now modern-day Nigeria, and our story begins in the late 15th century with the arrival of the Portuguese.
The Portuguese were the first Europeans to reach Benin, right?
They were. The first visits were as early as 1472 when Rui de Esguerra explored the coast. But more significant contact began in 1485 with Juez Afonso de Vero.
This is during the reign of Oba Ozalua, a pivotal figure in Benin history.
Absolutely. Obazalua was a powerful ruler who oversaw a period of expansion and consolidation for the Benin Kingdom.
So what was the nature of this early relationship with the Portuguese? Was it all about conquest and colonization from the start?
Not at all. What's fascinating is that the early interactions were largely peaceful and focused on trade.
Trade. What were they trading?
Well, the Portuguese were primarily interested in pepper, which Benin had in abundance.
Pepper was a highly sought-after commodity in Europe at the time.
It was. It was used as a spice, a preservative, and even as a form of currency.
So both sides had something the other wanted.
Exactly. And this led to a relatively balanced and mutually beneficial exchange, at least initially.
That's a far cry from the image of European colonialism that we often have.
It is, and it's important to remember that these early encounters were far more nuanced than simple narratives of domination and exploitation.
Now, the Portuguese weren't just interested in pepper. They were also captivated by Benin art.
Oh, absolutely. Benin art was renowned for its intricate craftsmanship and sophisticated aesthetic. The Portuguese were particularly drawn to the bronze and ivory castings.
These were truly remarkable works of art. The level of detail and skill involved is just incredible.
And the Portuguese arrival had a significant impact on Benin art in a couple of key ways. First, it led to an increase in the availability of brass, which was essential for creating these castings.
So the Portuguese brought more brass with them.
They did. And this influx of raw material allowed Benin artists to experiment with new forms and techniques.
We start to see these incredibly detailed representations of Portuguese figures appearing in Benin art.
Yes. There are armlets with Portuguese heads, tusks with full figures of Portuguese soldiers, and even bronze plaques incorporating Portuguese torsos.
It's like the Benin artists were incorporating these new arrivals into their own visual language.
Exactly. They weren't just copying European styles, they were reinterpreting them through a distinctly Benin lens.
We also see the influence of European weaponry and armor in Benin art from this period.
Yes. Benin artists began depicting swords, helmets, and other military gear often adorned with traditional Benin motifs.
So there's this fascinating blending of European and Benin elements happening.
There is. It's a testament to the creativity and adaptability of Benin artists.
And it's not just brass and imagery that the Portuguese brought with them. It's possible they also introduced new artistic ideas and influences from other parts of their vast trading empire.
That's a very strong possibility. The Portuguese were active in India and other parts of Asia, and it's likely that they brought goods and ideas from those regions to Benin.
Things like ivory caskets, illuminated manuscripts, and even Indian paintings could have made their way to Benin.
Yes, and these could have influenced the composition and style of Benin art, particularly the arrangement of figures and bronze plaques.
So this early Portuguese period seems like a time of great artistic innovation and experimentation in Benin.
It was. The reign of Oba Isagi in the first half of the 16th century is considered a high point for Benin art.
Why is that?
Well, Isagi was a very receptive ruler who encouraged artistic development. And the increased availability of brass, thanks to the Portuguese trade, meant that artists had more resources to work with.
So it was a perfect combination of a supportive ruler and ample materials.
It was, and this is when we see the creation of some of the most iconic Benin art pieces like rolled collar beds, finely crafted pectorals, ivory gongs and armlets, and the early queen mother heads.
Even the appearance of circled crosses on plaques is attributed to this era.
Yes. Those crosses are thought to be a reflection of the Portuguese influence and possibly even a sign of early Christian missionary activity.
And what about those fascinating Afro-Portuguese ivories, those salt cellar spoons and hunting horns that are so unique.
Those are really interesting pieces. They were actually made specifically for the Portuguese market.
Really?
Yes, they often depict scenes and figures that were unfamiliar to Benin society, like angels or European soldiers with firearms.
Was they commissioned by the Portuguese?
They were. It's a clear example of a commercial art exchange catering to European tastes.
And in the long run, the consistent supply of brass from the Portuguese had a lasting impact on Benin's artistic tradition.
Yes, Benin cast art largely transitioned to using brass as its primary material.
So the Portuguese influence on Benin art was both stylistic and material.
It was a multifaceted influence that left an enduring legacy on one of Africa's most celebrated artistic traditions.
Now, we've talked about the tangible evidence of this early encounter, the art and the materials. But what about the Benin people themselves? How did they perceive and remember these early interactions with the Portuguese?
That's where oral traditions come in. They provide invaluable insights into how these encounter were experienced and passed down through generations.
So what do these oral traditions tell us about the arrival of the Portuguese?
Well, they corroborate the historical accounts that Oba Ozulua was the ruler at the time, and they also suggest that the Portuguese were initially welcomed quite warmly.
Really, there's a story about Oba Ozulua ordering water to be placed along the routes to Ocoquim for the arriving Portuguese traders.
Yes, that story is a testament to their initial hospitality. It paints a picture of a kingdom that was open to engaging with these new arrivals.
And there's even a children's song that references the early interactions between the Benin people and the Portuguese.
Yes. This simple Edo song about pounded yam and herbs offers a glimpse into those early exchanges. It suggests a level of familiarity and even camaraderie.
But over time, that perception seems to have shifted.
Yes. As the relationship with the Portuguese continued, proverbs, sayings, and songs began to portray them in a more negative light.
What kind of negative light?
They were often depicted as being self-serving and lacking compassion for the Edo people.
It's like the initial goodwill started to fade.
It did. And this shift in perception is reflected in the oral traditions. It's a reminder that historical memory is shaped by the ongoing nature of relationships.
It also highlights the importance of considering multiple perspectives when studying history.
Exactly. We need to look beyond the official records and listen to the voices of those who lived through these events.
So beyond art and oral accounts, what other tangible changes did the Portuguese bring to Benin?
Well, one of the most significant was the introduction of firearms.
Firearms, that must have had a major impact on warfare in the region.
It did. While Benin already had a strong military tradition, the arrival of firearms changed the balance of power.
And how did the Benin people respond to this new technology?
They adapted quickly. The eye-gun metalworking guilds were renowned for their skill, and they soon began producing their own versions of European firearms.
Like the Dane gun, a type of flintlock musket.
Yes. And they also created pistols, which they called ofbisegba.
So they weren't just passive recipients of this technology, they were actively innovating and adapting it to their own needs.
Exactly. They recognized the power of firearms, but they also sought to maintain their own technological independence.
But there was one crucial element that they remained reliant on the Portuguese for.
Gunpowder. Producing gunpowder required specialized knowledge and ingredients that were not readily available in Benin.
So despite their ingenuity, they were still dependent on European suppliers for this vital component.
They were. And this dependence had implications for the future of Benin's relationship with European powers.
Beyond firearms, what other cultural elements did the Portuguese introduce?
Well, there's the uguacpada hairstyle that's so prominent in Benin iconography. It's thought to have been inspired by the headwear of Roman Catholic bishops who visited during Oba Esigi's reign.
If you look at depictions of those bishops, the resemblance is quite striking.
It is. It's a fascinating example of how cultural exchange can work in unexpected ways.
What other cultural influences were there?
The Portuguese introduced a number of luxury goods that became integrated into Benin culture.
For example,
Red velvet became associated with royalty, and linen and silk shirts were adopted as status symbols.
these were often given as gifts by the Portuguese.
They were, and they were seen as markers of wealth and prestige.
What about jewelry?
Coral and glass beads became even more prevalent in adornment.
And the Portuguese also introduced new symbols of authority, like the big umbrella and the fan.
They did. These became integral parts of Benin's royal regalia.
Even in the realm of dining, there were changes.
Yes. The Portuguese introduced spoons and drinking vessels called acalaca.
And these utensils eventually became part of Benin's culinary etiquette.
They did. It's amazing how these seemingly small introductions can have such a lasting impact on the culture.
And beyond these more visible changes, the Portuguese also brought new medicines and spices.
Yes, they may have introduced quinine-containing bark to combat malaria, and they definitely introduced curry, which became a popular spice in Benin cuisine.
So the Portuguese influence was widespread and multifaceted.
It extended from art and technology to fashion, food, and even medicine.
Now, perhaps the most significant, albeit ultimately short-lived impact of the Portuguese was the introduction of Christianity.
This is a really interesting chapter in Benin's history. Oba Esigi's reign, particularly after the Benin-Ida War around 1516, presented a window for Christian conversion.
Why was that?
Well, the war had weakened Benin's traditional religious institutions, and Esigi himself seems to have been open to exploring new spiritual ideas.
And there are letters from that time that describe the beginnings of a concerted effort to spread Christianity in Benin.
Yes. Letters from Duarte Pires, a Portuguese emissary, talk about peace and conversion efforts.
Isigi is even recorded as having built a church, possibly a cathedral.
He did. And he encouraged his son, the crown prince, and other chiefs to convert.
This suggests a genuine interest in Christianity at the highest levels of Benin society.
It does. And it's worth noting that literacy was also introduced among the elite during this period.
So Christianity and education went hand in hand.
They did. And this early exposure to literacy may have played a role in shaping Benin's subsequent interactions with Europeans.
Now, it wasn't just one church that was built. There were multiple churches constructed in Benin City at this time.
Yes. Historical accounts mention 4 main churches. Akpapaba, which was likely the cathedral, Ugbalaka Iri, and Ugbwagi.
And the discovery of an episcopal cross suggests that Akpapaba was indeed the seat of a bishop.
Yes. It's clear that there was a significant Christian presence in Benin during this period.
And these churches were likely substantial structures.
They were. They may have been built with the help of Portuguese artisans, or at least under their supervision using local materials like mud, since stone wasn't readily available.
And even the name Akpava has a possible European origin.
It does. One theory connects it to the Latin phrase Papa Via, meaning the Pope's way, or the road to the Pope.
It's a fascinating linguistic link that hints at the extent of the Christian influence.
It is, and it's a reminder that cultural exchange can leave its mark in unexpected ways.
But this initial flourishing of Christianity didn't last, did it?
No. By the early 18th century, formal Christianity had largely faded in Benin.
Why did that happen?
Well, for one thing, the flow of priests from Portugal ceased. And without their continued presence, the Christian faith struggled to take root.
And there was also a process of syncretism occurring.
Yes. Christian elements began to merge with traditional Benin beliefs, creating a hybrid faith.
The Arusa Shrine is a good example of this.
It is. It became a place where a concept of the supreme god was worshipped, but with indigenous rituals.
And even the Ohensa, the traditional priest there, used a staff that represented the Catholic bishop's cross.
Yes. It's a clear example of how Christian symbols were reinterpreted and incorporated into the existing religious framework.
So despite its decline, Christianity left its mark on Benin's spiritual landscape.
It did. And it's worth noting that Benin City was likely one of the earliest places in what is now Nigeria to have embraced Christianity.
Oba Esigi's conversion was a bold move, and it caused quite a stir at the time.
It did. It nearly led to an upheaval, as some people saw it as a betrayal of their traditional beliefs.
But ultimately, it seems to have been a relatively peaceful transition.
It was. And even after the decline of formal Christianity, some of its elements continued to be practiced in the palace.
For example,
The Maltese cross became a royal motif, and the daily palace ceremony of Eguayamitan seems to have incorporated elements of morning and evening mass.
so the legacy of Christianity persisted in subtle ways.
It did. It's woven into the fabric of Benin's cultural history.
Now, it wasn't just religion that the Portuguese introduced. They also brought the concept of formal education.
Yes. And it's believed that the 3 city chapels, Ugbalaka Iri and Ugbeg, may have functioned as schools.
Teaching literacy alongside religious instruction.
Exactly. They may have been the earliest Christian schools in Nigeria.
And the name Arusa Nuwain, which translates to Chapel of Wisdom or Knowledge, supports this idea.
It does. It suggests that these places were seen as centers of learning.
And Oba or Hagba Esigi's son was a key figure in this early educational exchange.
He was. He received education in Sao Tome and Lisbon and was initially intended to become a priest.
He was arguably the most formally educated Oba until the 20th century.
He was. And the Edo saying, I know Obo o Ibo, meaning you cannot be king and concurrently be a priest, speaks to the choice he ultimately made.
He chose to rule, but his European education had a lasting impact on his reign.
Absolutely. It's reflected in his policies such as forbidding execution in adultery cases.
He also seems to have had a strong interest in maritime affairs.
He did. He developed the lagoon system and established the Inogi ship in Lagos.
He also boosted trade with the Portuguese and oversaw a period of military strength and expansion.
He was a truly remarkable ruler who combined traditional Benin values with a modern outlook.
But sadly, it was during his reign and that of his successor that formal Christianity and education began to wane.
Yes. The churches eventually became Aro Osa, shrines to the supreme god, and the catechists became Oanosa, priests of the supreme god.
So it was a gradual process of absorption and reinterpretation.
It was, but the seeds of literacy and education had been sown.
Finally, let's talk about the lasting linguistic and agricultural contributions of the Portuguese.
These are subtle but significant legacies.
What kind of linguistic contributions?
Well, they introduced new words into the Edo language,
Like,
kuye for spoon and akalaka for tumbler.
and there's even the possibility that they introduced a new type of calabash called oku.
They also brought new crops such as pineapples, coconuts, and oranges.
And these crops are now staples of the Benin diet.
They are, and their Benin names often incorporate the term Igbo, meaning white person.
Like Alamo for orangey Igbo for pineapple and Uvigo for coconut.
Yes. It's a reminder of the lasting impact of this early encounter.
So the Portuguese may have left, but their presence is still felt in Benin's language and cuisine.
Absolutely. Their influence is woven into the fabric of everyday life.
Now that brings us to the arrival of another European power, the British.
The British entered the scene much later in the mid-16th century.
And their relationship with Benin was quite different from the start, wasn't it?
It was. The first recorded British contact was in 1553 during the reign of Oba or Hugbois,
And their primary interest was trade.
just like the Portuguese. But the British were initially focused on pepper.
And they faced some challenges early on, didn't they?
They did. Disease took a heavy toll on their crews, and Queen Mary even temporarily banned further voyages.
But the lure of profit was too strong.
It was. And by 1591, trade between Benin and Britain was booming.
But pepper wasn't the only commodity they were interested in.
No. The transatlantic slave trade soon became a major part of their relationship.
And the British were heavily involved in this horrific trade.
They were. English ships regularly acquired slaves from Ukot, Benin's port.
And this trade had a devastating impact on Benin and the wider region.
It did. It led to the depopulation of communities, the breakdown of social structures, and the spread of violence.
Alongside slaves, the British also traded in ivory.
Yes. Ivory was a valuable commodity in Europe used for everything from piano keys to billiard balls.
Interestingly, Benin cloth, which had been a significant export in earlier periods, declined in importance.
It did. It was overshadowed by the more lucrative slave trade.
But eventually the slave trade was abolished.
Yes. In the early 19th century, Britain outlawed the slave trade.
And this led to a shift towards legitimate commerce.
It did. The British began to focus on other commodities like palm oil, rubber, and timber.
Palm oil was in high demand due to the Industrial Revolution.
It was. It was used for making soap lubricants, margarine, and candles.
And rubber became increasingly important with the invention of the pneumatic tire.
Yes. Benin's rubber forests were a valuable resource for the British.
And timber was another key commodity.
Especially hardwoods like Iroko obesh and mahogany.
But the British were exploiting Benin's natural resources on a large scale.
They were, and they often did so with little regard for the environmental consequences.
It's important to note that the Oba of Benin often maintained monopoly rights over the trade of certain items.
Yes, like palm oil and kernels. This gave him some leverage in negotiations with the British.
But ultimately, the power dynamic was heavily skewed in favor of the British.
It was. They had the military and economic might to enforce their will.
And in return for these raw materials, the British imported manufactured goods into Benin.
Yes. Things like textiles, jewelry tools, and even firearms.
So there's a constant flow of goods between the two regions.
There was. But it was a system that ultimately benefited the British far more than the Benin people.
So what were some of the defining characteristics of this British-Benin trade relationship?
Well, one key feature was the establishment of courts of equity.
What were those?
They were courts set up to resolve commercial disputes between British traders and Benin merchants.
So an attempt to create a fair and impartial system.
In theory, yes. but in practice, the courts often favored the British.
And the Oba of Benin played an active role in negotiating trade agreements.
He did. He tried to secure the best possible terms for his people.
But as we've discussed, the balance of power was unequal.
It was, and the British often used their influence to pressure the Oba into making concessions.
Oku remained the central commercial seaport for this trade.
It did. It was a bustling hub of activity with ships coming and going constantly.
And the trust system was a crucial aspect of this trade.
It was. British traders would extend credit to Benin middlemen in the form of goods.
This created a system of debt and dependence.
It did, and it gave the British even more control over the trade.
It's interesting to note that in earlier periods, the Benin Obas themselves had extended credit to European traders.
Yes. That shows that the power dynamic was more balanced in those early encounters.
But with British, the balance had shifted decisively.
It had. And this shift had profound consequences for the future of Benin.
Now let's talk about the role of religion in this relationship. The British also engaged in missionary activities, but it seems to have been a different story from the Portuguese.
It was. The Portuguese had some early success in introducing Christianity, but the British efforts faced much greater resistance.
Why was that?
Well, Benin's traditional religious beliefs were deeply ingrained, and there was a strong suspicion of foreign influence.
And the Obas themselves were wary of the potential power of missionaries.
They were. They saw missionaries as a threat to their own authority.
And ironically, the earlier ban on the male slave trade by Oba Ezigi may have actually hindered the spread of Christianity. Well, it prevented Benin people who had converted to Christianity elsewhere from returning home.
That's right. They weren't able to bring their new faith back to Benin.
So the British missionaries faced an uphill battle.
They did. They encountered high mortality rates, inadequate training of local catechists, and a general lack of understanding of Benin culture.
It's no wonder they struggled to make headway.
It wasn't until after the British conquest of Benin in 1897 that missionary efforts saw more widespread success.
So their military victory paved the way for their religious ambitions.
It did. And they established a number of churches and schools in Benin after the conquest.
Which brings us to that fateful event, the British invasion of Benin in 1897.
It was a pivotal moment in Benin's history, marking the end of its independence.
What led to this invasion?
The immediate cause was the ambush of a British delegation led by Acting Consul General James Phillips.
What happened?
Phillips and his men were traveling to Benin City despite being warned by the Oba not to come during the Egg Festival.
Why were they warned not to come?
The Egg Festival was a sacred time when tradition forbade the presence of strangers.
So Phillips ignored this warning.
He did, and his delegation was attacked near the village of Ugbein.
What was the British response?
They were furious. They saw it as an act of aggression, and they launched a full-scale invasion.
And Benin was no match for the British military might.
It wasn't. Benin City was captured in February 1897.
And Oba Ovanramwen was deposed and exiled?
Yes. He was sent to Calabar, where he died in 1914.
And with the fall of Benin City, the kingdom was annexed to the Niger Coast Protectorate.
It was the end of an era.
So we've seen two very different European encounters with Benin. The Portuguese arrived as traders and left a lasting legacy on art, culture, and religion. The British came as conquerors and imposed their rule by force.
It's a stark contrast, and it highlights the complexities of European colonialism.
But both encounters had a profound impact on the Benin kingdom.
They did, and their legacies continue to shape Benin today.
As we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with a few questions to ponder.
What are they?
How did that early, more equitable relationship with the Portuguese shape Benin's understanding of later European encounters? And how do the legacies of both periods continue to resonate in Benin society today?
These are important questions, and they invite us to think critically about the long-term consequences of these cross-cultural interactions.
I encourage you to explore the fascinating history of the Benin Kingdom further. It's a story of resilience, creativity, and ultimately survival in the face of immense challenges.
And don't forget to check out the incredible artifacts that bear witness to this remarkable story. They're a testament to the enduring spirit of the Benin people.
Until our next deep dive.
Goodbye.